Bon dia, buenos días, good morning, and thanks for coming to the presentation of the book General Equilibrium and Game Theory, 10 Papers by Andreu Mas-Colell. I'm very pleased, I think it's a very good occasion to give tribute to one of the lives of Andreu. Andreu is a person of many lives, as other people. And I think I want to thank particularly all the friends who had made this possible, the book, and I think it's a very good occasion to celebrate that. It's also the right place because we celebrate also this year the 25th anniversary of the Pompeu Fabra, Universitat Pompeu Fabra, now in all the rankings on top. So, and I remember 25 years ago, I was just visiting the Institute de Anàlisi Econòmica, and he calls me and tells me about this project, about a new university or something. And then he asked me, very much of his style, said, well, I'm sure you don't want to do that, but tell me in a couple of days at most, okay? So then I got involved. And then I went to see him there, and it was always very pleasant to be in their house in Cambridge, and with Esther, and house open to everyone. And of course, we started discussing about this project, but then he was finishing the last proofs of the textbook. So we have to combine the weekend within these two things. And another thing I found a little surprising is then you go to the bathroom in their house, and there was La Vanguardia, okay? Because of course he had to keep track of the proofs of the new project and everything nitty-gritty that was happening in Catalonia at that time. So, as I said, it's like comparative analysis. When you see someone of different lives, you put them one next to each other, and then you realize that Andreu has been doing always the same thing, has been doing Andreu. So today we celebrate with this book, which I think is a good proof of it. I want to give the word to Joaquim Silvestre, which has been playing a major role in this operation.
Thank you, Ramon. Let me say 2 or 3 words in Catalan, and then I will switch to English, since we are in Catalonia. So, rector magnífic de la Universitat Pompeu Fabra, autoritats, il·lustre senyor diputat del Parlament de Catalunya, senyor president i senyora directora de la Barcelona GSE School of Economics, amigues i amics, bon dia a tots. Estic molt content de poder participar en aquest acte i ara passaré a l'anglès. First, let me thank the Barcelona Graduate School of Economics and its director, Professor Teresa García Milà, for sponsoring and organizing this event and for inviting me. I am particularly grateful to Professors Hugo Sonnenschein, to my right, and Jerry Green, who have been traveling from so far to be part of this event, and particularly to Professor Green, who just arrived this morning from Boston. In Barcelona, is leaving tomorrow, morning, so probably he will stay in Barcelona for less than 24 hours. The occasion is, of course, as we all know, the presentation of Andreu's book. So this is Andreu's book. It's General Equilibrium and Game Theory, 10 papers, with an introduction by Hugo Sonnenschein, published by Harvard University Press. You can buy the book. There is a stand to the right, so you can buy the book, and I encourage you to do so. Sorry?
35 euros, I just bought it.
That's the conference price. Yeah, it's there's a discount. Yeah. In June 5 to 7, 2009, some of us, including most of what we are here on the dais, Professor Sonnenschein and Professor Green, were here for a meeting honoring Andreu on occasion of his 65th birthday. The meeting was formally the 18th edition of the European Workshop in General Equilibrium Theory. Subsequently, the Journal of Mathematical Economics published a special issue in honor of Andreu in 2 volumes, September and November 2010, with special editors Bernard Cornet, Hugo Sonnenschein, and Xavier Calzamilla, who is somewhere here. During this event, some of us started toying with the idea of honoring Andreu also with a book. The co-conspirators included Professor Sonnenschein, Xavier Calzamilla, and also Tom Bosch-Domènech. Almost 7 years later, the final product is here, thanks to a very large extent to Professor Thierry Green's commitment to it. In representation of Xavier Calzamilla, who is here, and of Tom Bosch, who unfortunately had an unavoidable conflict, let me just say a few words about the book. General Equilibrium and Game Theory is centered in 10 papers chosen by Andreu among his extensive academic output. They are preceded by a foreword written by Andreu and by a substantial introduction by Professor Sonnenschein. 2 appendices conclude: a biographical one entitled Rhyme and Reason, written by Tom Bosch, Xavier Calzamilla, and myself, and a list of Andreu's academic publications up to the present. Our biographical note focuses on the sequence of the 4 phases of Andreu's career, geographically identified with Minnesota, Berkeley, Harvard, and finally Barcelona. Our note does not dwell on his undergraduate pre-Minnesota years, but we do refer to the fact that Andreu, together with other students, some of them present here, was suspended by the University of Barcelona because of their anti-Franco political activism. As an update, about a month ago, on March 11th, the University of Barcelona officially rescinded this suspension. So that was 50 years later. The occasion was the 50th anniversary of the event known locally as the Cappuccinada, when the underground Democratic Student Union was constituted by a meeting of more than 400 people, several of whom are here in this room, in a Franciscan convent. The Franco police surrounded the convent during the meeting, and a 3-day siege ensued. Andreu was one of the main organizers of the Cappuccinada. This is not in the book, so that's why that's why I mentioned it here. Today we meet for the presentation of Andreu's book and also to pay him tribute. On a personal note, I tried not to miss an opportunity to publicly express my gratitude to Andreu for everything that he has done for me. Andreu has been a superb friend and teacher since the early 60s when we met as undergraduates. I am deeply indebted to him in many dimensions. Thanks, Andreu, and thank you all for coming.
As Joaquim said, we are very pleased to have Jerry Green. He's not only a co-author of his famous textbook, but also played an instrumental role in having Andreu at Harvard.
Well, let me begin by saying what a great honor it is for me and a great pleasure to be here in Barcelona and to be with my friend Andreu. And my role here is to tell a few stories about Andreu. And I'm going to be a little autobiographical because I'm interested in the history of economics, and in particular, I want to talk about how Andreu came to Harvard, what was my relationship with him, what actually happened in this book that people have heard about that we did together, and finally the book that we're here to celebrate, which is the 10 papers that Andreu has selected. So I heard about Andreu way before I ever met him. I believe he was still a graduate student, and I was still a graduate student. I first heard about him from John Chipman, was one of his teachers in Minnesota, and Chipman, being in international trade, would visit Rochester, where one of my teachers was in international trade, and was telling me about the great Minnesota students. So this was a legend that preceded him. Andreu had great good fortune. You know, anyone who has achieved the remarkable successes that Andreu has to combine two things. One is, three things really. One is ability and the other is hard work, but you also have to be lucky. And Andreu was very lucky. He went to graduate school in one of the two great places for economic theory in the 1960s and 1970s, and his first job was in the other one, Minnesota and Berkeley. In Minnesota, he had as teachers Hugo and Ket Richter and Leo Hurwitz, and there were many good young people. At Berkeley, there was Gerard Debreu, Roy Radner, Dan McFadden, Steve Smale. If you start looking in mathematics, these were places where economic theory was king. It was well respected and rightly regarded as the wellspring of all of economics. My story is a little different. I was also lucky, but in a different way. I came to Harvard in 1970 as a young assistant professor, and I was very fortunate to work with Kenneth Arrow. That was the reason I went there. But the rest of Harvard was not that interested in economic theory. I think I'm putting it mildly. It was an exciting place to be. We had great connections with good people in other fields. There were economists who were interested in what we were doing, but economics was not held at the pinnacle of the subject the way it was at Minnesota and Berkeley. So what actually happened, in 1978, Arrow returned to Stanford, and I was still pretty young in 1978, but I was left there, and it was very clear that we needed to hire the best people we could in economic theory, and there was no doubt in my mind what that meant, and I beseeched Andreu on many occasions. I remember visiting him in his Berkeley office in 1980, and to Harvard's credit, my colleagues who were not in economic theory but appreciated the work also beseeched him, and one at a time, when everyone went out to Berkeley and pleaded with him to come. I think first he said no, but then he said yes. So we were very fortunate, and Andreu joined the Harvard faculty and immediately began to touch every aspect of department life, not just research and the training of students, but he was the editor of Econometrica, which Harvard had never had the editor of Econometrica before, and now he did a great job for the Econometric Society. He played a major role in hiring good young people in our field. And most of all, he was the center of a lot of friendships and a lot of good times. One event I remember very, very well was in 1983 when Gerard Debreu was awarded the Nobel Prize. He was the first person in mathematical economics to get the Nobel Prize. And Andreu and Esther hosted a wonderful, spontaneous gathering, because of course none of us knew it would be Gerard, but we all went over to their house in Newton, and I'll never forget that. It was a wonderful evening, and it was clear that Andreu was the center of everything. He was a great colleague. Now, a few words about the book, the textbook for which we are well known. You know, he's not that well known. For me, it's an important thing. For Andreu, he's done so many things, it's just another book. But I would like to take a historical point of view and talk about what first-year graduate courses in economics were like. Because I think we all take it as given now that economics is a subject with a core set of results, and every graduate student needs to know them, and they get our book and that's what they do. But in 1970, when I came to Harvard, things were not like that. And when I was a student at Rochester, it definitely was not like that. Every department had its own way of training graduate students. The Rochester approach was quite unusual. We didn't have a textbook at all. There were textbooks, a few good textbooks, but we didn't use any of them. We read the translation of Walras into English. We read Samuelson's Foundations and the appendix to Hicks' Value and Capital, and that's how we learned. It was a good education for me, but I don't think it would be exportable to other universities because it took the personal touch of my teachers to bring those books to life. When I came to Harvard, things were also in a state of transition. Arrow had arrived there just 2 years before. Again, they were not using a standard textbook. When I accepted the job, the chairman wrote to me and he said, "We're so happy you're joining our department. You'll be teaching with Vasily Leontief." I was scared to death. Well, it turned out I wasn't teaching with Vasily Leontief. Dale Jorgensen took over that class. That's the first course in microeconomic theory. And he didn't use a book either, but he brought with him from Berkeley, he had just moved from Berkeley the year before. He brought with him from Berkeley a set of lecture notes by Dan McFadden. That was the Berkeley version of economic theory. And that's what we used. Of course, I was completely out of my depth. We didn't do that at Rochester. We didn't know what duality was at Rochester. And this was a book written in a particular style, specifically so that it would be useful for econometricians doing estimations of cost and production functions and things like that. So that was the state of economics textbooks, first-year graduate textbooks at that time. And fast forward to the time that Andreu arrived, I had circulated a handful of notes of my own. The course evolved in the late 70s. But when Andreu came, things accelerated and the notes became codified and deepened, and finally we got Mike Winston on the faculty, and the three of us worked on the notes until, as I say, the notes confessed. We beat them until they confessed, and then they became a book. It is 100% clear that this book would not have happened if it weren't for Andreu. He touched every corner of it, and I still teach the first-year course. You know, some people move on and don't do the same thing over and over again, but I've taught this course for 46 years, and I'm still learning. And what I'm learning is that when you give the book a close reading, you see Andreu's ideas in every sentence, in every footnote. And I continually relearn things that I should have known, but sure enough, it's something that Andreu thought about and found its way into the book. And I think it's the thing that has made the book what it is. It can be read on many levels. And like other things of that form, it gets a little more appreciation with age. It's getting old now. I mean, there are many things that have happened in economic theory that are not in the book. But for what it covered, which was the state of the art as of 1995, it's written at a very deep level, and that's all due to Andreu. Now for the book that we're celebrating today, 10 essays. As was just said, the idea for this book was hatched by several of Andreu's friends from Barcelona at a previous event. I attended the event, but I wasn't part of the team that came up with the idea for 10 essays. But what I remember about the event was, first, it was a great conference in honor of Andreu's 65th birthday. Many, many former students were there. You could see the deep love that they had for Andreu, and you could see the effects of Andreu's work on the careers that they had. Some of these people are the leaders of our profession today. So he's been enormously influential. That was reflected in the conference and reflected in the fact that some of his friends from even undergraduate days pressed him to do this book. What is my role in the book? It's been mentioned a couple of times, but I have to be completely honest. This was the easiest and the most pleasurable thing I ever did at Harvard, and it was really easy. Hugo called me and he said, you know, Andreu was going to publish 10 papers that his friends said he should do. Who would be a good publisher? And being a little bit of a Harvard partisan, I thought, let's get it for the Harvard University Press, because I've been one of their advisors for many, many years. And so that was easy to do because I knew the editor very well, and I simply suggested it. The editor knew Andreu's work very well, and I had to write a report saying why this was a good idea. But as I say, it was the easiest task I ever had. So that's the sum and substance of how the book came to be. The book itself, I hope you will look at it and buy it. It's a great book. I own 3 copies. One at home, one in each of my 2 offices. It's really great. I'm giving a course for undergraduates this term called Great Theorems in Microeconomic Theory. 2 of them are Andreu's theorems in the book. So that's quite a percentage for one person to have. The book is not a compendium of Andreu's corpus of research. The way I think about it, it's a master class. This is the way economics should be done. And it's not just that the results are deep and difficult. There are lots of deep, difficult results. Andreu not only gets the right answers, he asks the right questions. If you look at every chapter of this book, it asks a question which is important for economics and important for economic theory, not just because it's hard to do and more general, but because it sheds light on an actual economy and real people, who are, after all, the subject that we're trying to model. It's the way economics should be. I think Andreu did a wonderful job in picking those 10 papers. It could have been many more than 10, but these 10 stand as an example, and I think we should all be thankful for what Andreu has done here.
Thank you. And of course, another person that had to be here because it has a lot to do as a friendship and a professional. And also here, Andreu was the founder of the Barcelona Graduate School of Economics, and he is the chairman of the Scientific Council. He has been many times in Barcelona helping the community. So I'm very pleased to have Hugo Sonnenschein.
Thank you very much. Andreu, Mr. Rector, Ramon, Teresa, ladies and gentlemen, and good friends, and I see so many good friends. It's lovely to be with you in this fairest of cities where last night we went out and saw Sarabada. And I'm exhausted. And I'm not going to do this for you. I'm not going to dance. It's an honor to participate in this event, which celebrates the publication of 10 papers, and more generally celebrates the scholarly work of Andreu Mas-Colell, and still more generally celebrates his contributions to society and to us. The book exists, as was said, because of Joachim Silvestre and Xavier Calsamilla and Ton Bosque, who were the main entrepreneurs, and because of Jerry Green. It may have been easy to do because it's such a wonderful opportunity for the press, but Jerry was there, and when I called, I clearly had in mind that Jerry might say, "We'll take it." My role is to provide some perspective of a colleague and a teacher, and I'm going to repeat a lot of what you've heard, and I've even been given more time, so excuse me for using it. But one repeats these things because they're all true, and they come out the same way. And like most formal theorists of his generation, Mas-Colell was profoundly influenced by the work of Kenneth Arrow and Gerard Debreu and their contemporaries, who in turn benefited from the Hicksian-Samuelson synthesis of microeconomic theory and the von Neumann-Morgenstern formulation of game theory. These are the gods. We shouldn't forget our gods. The Arrow-Debreu theory had its definitive expression in Debreu's thin but monumental theory of value. This was Debreu's crowning achievement, his most referenced work. Coupled with Arrow's social choice and individual values, it established the power of the axiomatic approach to economics. It was also the place where a significant number of economists were introduced to the mathematical tools that are now viewed as essential to modern economic theory. Tools that have led to a deeper understanding of fundamental issues in price theory and to notable gains in accuracy, generality, and simplicity. Debreu believed in the long-term impact of the new approach on all of economics, and he lived to see a world in which one could not attend a series of lectures in monetary economics, finance, or international trade without hearing the phrase Arrow-Debreu model. From microeconomics to macroeconomics, and from the most theoretical to the most applied, by the standards of 50 years ago, we are now all mathematical economists. But even for Debreu, it may have been difficult to envision the substantial technical and conceptual challenges that lay ahead in recasting the Walrasian theory to fit a wide variety of applications. Moreover, he could not have foreseen the extent to which theories of bargaining, auctions, and matching would integrate game theory and price theory and eventually lead to rich empirical and practical applications. The papers in this volume, just as Jerry said, they're a masterclass. They represent some of the finest of Mas-Colell's scholarly contribution. And taken together, they establish Andreu's position as the worthy successor to Gerard Debreu, his colleague at Berkeley. More than any other living economist, Andreu has been at the center of establishing the possibility and power of Debreu's vision. He has been our teacher in taking the next step. During the period 74 to 94, the period during which the first 8 papers were written, Andreu came to be known as one of the most analytically powerful economists of his generation. But just as Jerry said, more than that was achieved. He emerged as someone who had mastered a broad range of economic thinking, had excellent taste and judgment, and was a leader in synthesizing the next chapter of economic learning. But perhaps I moved too quickly, and in doing so miss a major contribution, one that Jerry speaks about from a different perspective. I slow down a bit and go back a bit. Andreu entered the University of Minnesota for his PhD studies in economics in 1968 and completed his dissertation under the supervision of Ket Richter. In the 60s and early 70s, Minnesota and Berkeley were 2 places where the mathematical approach to economics held particular sway. So it was no surprise that Andreu took his first position at Berkeley in 1972. His generosity to colleagues and their respect for the breadth of his knowledge led to increased responsibility in the graduate programs at Berkeley and then at Harvard, where he moved in 1981. Not only did Mas-Colell attract outstanding thesis students, but he was also very good at introducing entering doctoral students who entered with a broad range of potential research interests, and indeed engaging the entire department, to modern economic theory. His pedagogical work of this period culminates in the text Microeconomic Theory. It's more expensive, but you can buy that one too, with Mike Winston and with Jerry. 1995. While this book builds upon the research and teaching of many individuals, as does the Bible, look, it's a text, everything is there. The influence of Mas-Colell is apparent and reflects his intellectual leadership of the entire community of economists. Over a more than 25-year period, this book is a worthy successor to the treatises of Hicks and Samuelson. This is not simply because it contains so much of what we must know in order to speak with one another, but also because it is wise, deeply synthetic, and analytically state-of-the-art. It equips the reader with the theoretical knowledge to confront a broad range of important applications, which include, for example, industrial organization, labor economics, financial economics, and international economics. I do have a little more time than others. I'm going to restrain myself from speaking about particular aspects of Andreu's scholarly contribution, but a few words are in order, and I take some risk here. At the heart of a genuine theory of economic dynamics are the ideas of adapting and learning and considering the behavior of others. After all, this is social science. This is not the variety of economic dynamics that existed when Mas-Colell entered graduate school. The paradigmatic models of that time included the Walrasian tâtonnement, which had no learning and no adapting except by an unmodeled market player who had no skin in the game. Parenthetically, for that world, Mas-Colell's improvement on Sonnenschein, Mantell, Debreu finished up the issue of tâtonnement dynamics and nested a classic result of Scarf on the possibility of global instability of tâtonnement. But at the end of 10 papers, in the concluding papers, with Sergio Hart, you see Andreu in search of a larger and more truly dynamic fish, an adaptive model of behavior in games that provides a dynamic foundation for Nash-type equilibrium. In my view, this is a critical next step, and he fits this in between affairs of state. I am very personally proud to have been Mas-Colell's instructor. However, today, I cannot with comfort claim the perspective of a teacher because in truth, I've learned at least as much from Andreu as I've taught him. We shared an outstanding environment in which to learn at the University of Minnesota. The university was an excellent place to study the mathematical approach to economics. Leo Hurwicz and John Chipman were distinguished senior members of the faculty, and Ken Richter had recently completed his groundbreaking work on revealed preference. My purpose today is simply to document some early impressions and to reflect upon Andreu's transition to builder of institutions and public servant. My first impressions of Andreu were of an individual with broad interests, a restless mind, unusual powers of persuasion, and a deep attachment to Catalonia and Spain. The young man who came to Minnesota in 1968 did not appear to have a stronger background in mathematics than most of the other graduate students of his time. However, my experience with other Catalan graduate students suggests that many had a great aptitude for and interest in mathematical approach to economics. But who knows, even this may have been an early Mas-Colell effect. I cannot claim to have seen immediately the unusual combination of abilities that went into his early achievements. Extraordinary aptitude for mathematics and economic thinking, and also independence. Beyond the general impression of intensity, it did not occur to me that Andreu was especially hardworking and devoted to his studies, certainly not to the exclusion of all else. He always appeared to have time for friendships and politics, and sometimes these seemed intertwined. The New York Times and the latest news from Spain were always by his side. I will close with a recollection that is somewhat delicate to discuss. Despite Andreu's devotion to economics and quick success in my country, I came to feel rather early on that he was on loan to the United States, and even on loan to academic economics during his years at Minnesota, Berkeley, and Harvard. The delicacy of speaking about this belief comes from the fact that so many academic economists view Andreu as our model. We've learned from him, and it is difficult for us to imagine a more worthy life than the one that Andreu lived as a professor at Berkeley and Harvard. None of what I say here is intended to diminish that conclusion. Yet, in the richest lives, there is time for different pursuits, and I tend to believe that Andreu was drawn back home by some of the same qualities that accounted for his academic success. And I would further suggest that the qualities of mind that make Andreu such a successful scholar-teacher are less far than one might imagine from at least some of the characteristics that make him an effective leader. Andreu is brave and not intimidated by the challenge of confronting new ideas. He listens well. He believes in the practical application of knowledge. He is tireless. He's a rigorous thinker. When one couples these qualities with his love of Catalonia and Spain, the possibilities for influencing change in Catalonia, and a strong sense of responsibility, it is perhaps not so surprising that he left Harvard at the peak of his academic career to create and lead institutions in Catalonia, Spain, and Europe. From his role in the creation of this university to his position as the Commissioner for Universities and Research of Catalonia, from his position as Secretary General of the European Research Council to his eventual position as Minister of Economics and Knowledge in the Catalan government. Andreu has been hard at work on activities that support the public good and for which he is particularly well-suited. We are grateful to have had Andreu on loan. Thank you to Catalonia, to Andreu's wife Esther, and to their exceptional children for sharing Andreu with us. We're grateful for the time he is able to spend on economic theory and in the support of economic institutions. We maintain a hope that his current work on matters of great political importance will lead to new perspectives and further results for economic science. We know how much he enjoys that work, and we want Andreu to know how much we in Econoland look forward to learning more from him. But we also appreciate the call to public service. Catalonia and Spain need great leaders who are worthy of following. Allow me to end on a serious but somewhat fanciful note. My own country, as you well know, is in somewhat perilous position with respect to political leadership and what could happen in the future. Less than 1 year ago, Andreu visited my university to receive a doctorate honoris causa, a wonderful event. He attached himself to the University of Chicago. We pulled him in. We take great people and we say, we gave you a degree. 20 years before, I signed the papers that brought a young Barack Hussein Obama to our university as a faculty member. Perhaps there is a favorable political destiny for those who are honored to attach themselves to my university. Thank you.
Thank you. And now I pass the word to Andreu. As mentioned before, he has been a follower and developer of the Breuer's theory. And the Breuer also had 10 papers and been concise in his production. And so we are very pleased to have the book and to have you here. Thanks.
Thanks. I'll say a few words in Catalan and then switch to English. Una de les avantatges de no estar ja a l'administració pública és que no m'haig de liar amb la seqüència protocolària d'adreces. Mai m'ho vaig aconseguir aprendre. Per tant, escolteu, benvinguts amics i benvolgudes amigues. Gràcies de tot cor a tots per ser avui aquí. Alguns de vosaltres heu vingut de ben lluny. Em permetreu que a partir d'ara m'expressi en anglès. Dear friends, it is good I have it written because otherwise after this I just could not improvise. I am, needless to say, overwhelmed. As a consequence, it is quite possible that the remarks that I will now produce will come out rather awkward. I'm sort of melting, you know, but I'll do my best. First of all, I would like to express my gratitude to Hugo and Jerry for being here today and for your words. I know this has not been easy for any of you. You come from very far, and it humbles me that you could think that I deserve it. For the initiative of the book and for making it possible, I thank again Hugo and Jerry, at this time joined by Antoni Bosch, Xavier Calsamiglia, and Joaquim Silvestre. You, Hugo, and you, friends, have written very nice things about me in respectively the introduction and the appendix to the book. There is a degree of generosity in what you write, but I will be indulgent about it and not complain. I wish to acknowledge the excellent editing job of Harvard University Press. I admire, I do not say this tongue-in-cheek, how scrupulous the editing has been. The papers have been typeset anew for the books, but all but one of the original, fortunately not many, misprints remain. There was a negotiation on that, and the editors of Harvard University Press insisted that the misprints are part of the original work. So they have to remain there, and I insisted, and they insisted. We negotiated. At the end, we changed one, which was very embarrassing, and I set my foot down, and you can find it, and it says corrected from the original in a footnote. Yes. No, in the topological vector lattices. There's a footnote there that says corrected from the original. Otherwise, all the misprints are there. Not that many. Finally, my thanks also go to the Barcelona GSE, and in particular to Teresa García Milà and Ramon Marimon for putting together this event today, and also Joaquim and Ramon for your words. The book selects 10 of my papers. The selection has been made by me, and in all likelihood is not the best possible. Let me say that this was a very painful exercise, and which made me understand why people love to publish their complete works, their collected works. You don't have to select. In the list, I have 120 papers. That means I had to throw away 11 for every one that I selected. It's awful. The 10 were selected in part by by the pull of the market, meaning citations. Yes, all my most cited papers are here, and I confess, and that says something about me, I suppose, that I don't have any highly cited paper which I despise. That could happen, but it hasn't happened. But there are some not highly cited papers which I like, so I have put some in here. But I hate the idea that somehow I'm sending the message that the other 110 papers are not worth it. And you can see from how I'm elaborating that that was difficult. Anyhow, there are 4 papers from my Berkeley period, 4 from Harvard, and 2 from Barcelona. The 4 from Berkeley Times are in classical general equilibrium. 2 of them, an equilibrium existence theorem without complete or transitive preferences, and on the equilibrium price set of an exchange economy, are directly linked and owe a lot to the work of Hugo Sonnenschein. 2 from my Harvard Times are again in general equilibrium, but the other 2 are in cooperative game theory. Finally, the 2 from Barcelona are on dynamic aspects of non-cooperative game theory. They, as well as 1 from Harvard, owe a lot to Jerusalem, as they are written jointly with Sergio Har from the Hebrew University. All the papers are, you must have realized, theoretical paper, actually very theoretical. One may ask, and I become anecdotal from here on, one may ask, how did a politically very involved student from Barcelona in the 60s of the last century become an economic theorist? I'll give you several answers. One is that this evolution is not that uncommon. I could give a long list of names for whom the same question could be posed. I remember Aoki when I arrived to Minnesota, for example. Another, more pragmatic, rests on a compatibility factor. Theory, at least in my experience, is not that time-consuming. You can certainly spend now and then 12-hour days working on a paper, both in the obsessive initial phases of hard thinking and in the phase of crossing T's and dotting I's. You can do that in your sleep. But in my experience, in the intermediate phases of developing the paper, you cannot, I should rather say, I could not systematically spend more than, say, 3 hours a day intensely thinking. At last count, the day has 24 hours, and therefore this leaves plenty of time to pursue other related interests. But since I am delivering these remarks in Barcelona, let me a bit more explicit and anecdotal. My excuses to the ones that are not from here. When I was an undergraduate student, I was occasionally exposed to some decent accounts of recent content, for example, of Arrow's impossibility theorem. But this was the exception. The fact that I was deeply unsatisfied by the approach to learning economics that consisted in long enumerations of authors and summaries, typically superficial, of what each author said, perhaps organized in a succession of schools. I crave what with time I recognize as an analytical approach. To be candid about it, there was in my undergraduate days a course that was formal and analytical. It was microeconomics. Perhaps you would now expect that I say that this changed my life. No, it almost ruined it. The course was tremendously dogmatic. We were being taught the truth. I failed the course 3 times. At last, in desperation, I resorted to learning the lessons by heart, or is it called by rote, and parroting them word by word. How I still became a macroeconomist is something to wonder about. At any rate, what could a student do to go beyond the enumeration of authors' approach? Well, Since the names were there, one could go to the library. It turned out that the library was well provided. It's the library of the University of Barcelona. I got the 3 essays of Koopman. I do not remember in which language, since I then did not know English well enough. Since this was a book in methodology, at least the second essay, and methodology was popular, it was well referenced in our lectures. Of course, I did not get much on the way of content, but I was fascinated. In a footnote, I found a reference to a book by Gerard Debré with the tantalizing and sort of left-wing title of The Theory of Value. I got the book in French. Again, fascination, a little else, although I did not fall into the trap of thinking I was getting it. Years later, by the way, Josep Oliu and myself translated the book that was published by Antoni Bosch. Somewhere along the way, I read Keynes in French and Schumpeter's History of Economic Analysis in Italian. So economic analysis would be it. I read Schumpeter well enough to be puzzled years later when the core equivalence theorem was presented as a rediscovery of Edgeworth. I did not know it had been forgotten. A minor advantage of being at the periphery is that you may not know that something good has gone out of fashion. Later, doing the doctoral preparatory courses in Madrid, I did go a bit beyond. I made a presentation of the Kaldor-Mirrlees growth model, translated into Spanish. And preparing it, I experienced the unmistakable pleasure one gets when you realize that you are really understanding something. I should say that earlier I had a similar feeling when presenting Ricardo's theory of comparative advantage at a summer seminar in Barcelona led by Ernest Lluch. I think it was in Madrid too, or maybe in Barcelona, that I got a copy of the Malenbeau-Bahara International Economic Association book on planning in English. I must have known some more English, although that was a mathematical book, so probably I did manage. It included a very attractive paper of Leo Horvitz from Minnesota. So when the fortunes of life, actually a lot of luck, as Jerry said, plus the fortune has to be helped, plus Walter Heller, soybean oil, Duane Andreas, Manolo Varela, Ángel Rojo, and Antoni Bosch gave me an opportunity to go to Minnesota, I knew about that place something more than the misleading fact that the campus was crossed by the Mississippi. As for mathematics, my papers are heavily mathematical. Let me say that even in left-wing circles, it had prestige, logic even more. I discovered that I might have some mathematical aptitude when at the exam period of my first year, I rushed from a very special facility where I had been invited to stay, so to speak, for 10 days to the math exam. I arrived in the nick of time, and somehow, and to my surprise, I got a good grade. Later, I remember that for a period, Salvador Barberá, Xavier Calsamiglia, myself, and perhaps some others took private math lessons. It is an immense pleasure for me to be able to say now that times have changed. The young students in Barcelona today do not find themselves in the same situation. Today, Barcelona is a lively hub of economic research in a variety of institutions and with much diversity of fields and approaches. Let me be clear, I still recommend the young PhD-inclined students seeking advice to attempt to go to a leading school abroad, Europe included, of course, but this owes much to the conviction that this sort of mobility has value in itself. At the same time, we also try successfully to attract students from everywhere to do their PhD with us, and we are certain and can prove it that we have much to offer them. It occurs to me at this concluding moment that perhaps you have been you would have expected me to address some words to be less anecdotal and address some words to the controversies of the day on economic affairs, or more likely, on the affairs of economics. Evidently, I have preferred a lighter discourse, but let me close with 3 remarks, more procedural than substantive, on this point. The first is that you should never dismiss out of hand the views of anyone who recognizes that the study of the economy, that is economics, is a challenging and demanding intellectual task. The second is that not dismissing out of hand can become taken seriously if the views are grounded on a solid education. The third is the personal conviction that in economics, lights come from the gathering of talented people. The more talented, the better, and from letting them talk, analyze, discuss, and even drink together. I will not go as far as saying that the more drinking, the better, but be sure that it is from this permanent collegial symposium that the new powerful ideas, which undoubtedly are needed, will emerge. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andreu. Hugo was saying that how all of us, and many more, have benefited from Andreu's work in many different dimensions. And you mentioned now about the undergraduate. I was undergraduate at the Autónoma, and we benefit from Joaquim coming, and Javier Emilia, and Isabel, and other people who gave a completely different flavor of what economics was. And of course, everyone was talking about Andreu. And one day, sometimes you came there too. Not everything was the same thing, because at that time, we didn't have quarter systems as we have here at Pompeu Fabra. That's something we did. But we had the whole year. So I had to take one course a whole year of the history of Catalan economic thought. And that was stretching it a little too much. But now we can tell that the history of economic Catalan thought is universal economics. So thanks. I'm sure that now other courses will be different. We have some time for questions and answers. Please refrain from asking any question about the specifics of the proofs, okay?
But if you find a misprint, let me know.
Open the floor if anyone wants to say something short.
So one of the things you can't do enough times is to say thank you to Andreu.
Jordi.
Okay, well, congratulations, Andreu, and thanks for everything. Now, let me ask you a question about your general equilibrium days. I think it's a measure of the success of general equilibrium. I guess one can say that it has been widely adopted in many other areas in economics, and in particular in my field, macroeconomics. You know? It's almost unthinkable that one could publish some model which did not have the discipline of general equilibrium. So I want to ask you whether at that time you and your colleagues who were working in developing the theory of general equilibrium envisioned that it was something that it had to be, it would not have to remain like an isolated part of economics, but something that had to be exported to all other areas of economics. So that's one question. And the other is, what do you think of the uses that have been made of the general equilibrium approach when they have been imported into areas like macroeconomics? Because much of the backlash that economics as a profession, economic theory in general, in a broad sense, is experiencing, especially after the crisis, seems to be directed, mostly coming from people that don't fully understand what we do, to the general equilibrium, optimization, rational expectations, emphasis that macroeconomists have made in their modeling in recent years. So I just wanted to hear what you think about those two issues. Thank you.
He wants to make this into a serious affair. We have to go to lunch, several small points. I think that in the animus of people working in general equilibrium, yes, there was the idea that I mean, almost by definition, that wasn't something isolated. Economics went this way and general equilibrium went that way. No, the idea was wide application. However, I think that if somebody from that time were to wake up these days, will be surprised that it be macroeconomics, the area where this has had a large impact. I think at that time one would have think on international trade, on industrial organization, but perhaps not so directly macroeconomics, although in hindsight, if one has to think of an area where partial equilibrium has conceptual difficulties, will be macroeconomics. But I think this is a bit in hindsight. Well, I believe the general equilibrium is a good methodology, so I think it's good that it's used in macro. But perhaps I could say also, when you say the criticisms, etc., that the spirit has not always been exactly the same, or one of the lessons of the general work in general equilibrium is for example, the Sonnenschein-Mantel-Debré theorem that says things can be very complicated. At least in the initial applications of general equilibrium to macroeconomics, and one can understand that because there are many periods, there is uncertainty, etc. The complexities that were explored were other complexities, not the ones that came from aggregation. So representative consumer, although I know that now there is lots, I think Albert works on macroeconomics without representative consumers. But let's say this line coming from general equilibrium, one will have the inclination of saying, what's the aggregation theory? Also, in general equilibrium, there have been, and there are a couple of papers among the 10, and on general equilibrium and game theory, and one of the papers in here influenced by the work of Hugo, where the point is to send the message that many of the results of classical general equilibrium theory do not depend on strong rationality postulates on the economic agents. You may have incompleteness, non-transitivities, etc. At least the positive part of the theory is not so dependent on this. The welfare the welfare part, that will be more debatable. And although one of the results, and I stop here, and one of the classic results of general equilibrium is the first fundamental theorem, which explores the conditions under which the market behavior yields an efficient result. General equilibrium is much broader. The thesis of Joachim, for example, was general equilibrium, but it was imperfect competition, and the equilibria were not efficient. In the translations and in the imports to macro, I suppose it is, or it can be, the same story.
I am going to complete with all of your anecdotes a very specific one. And I'm not asking Andreu for the permission to bring here some very well-kept secret, okay? So we're friends, and my husband is a theoretical physicist. I'm a mathematician, so we all share with him and Esther the love for mathematics. But we also tried sometime in the past to try to share a passion that my husband has on playing bridge. So we're talking about games, okay? So this is a different type of game, okay? And we met several times, and I hope that now that he hasn't had this administration obligation, we can keep meeting for the future. But, you know, Andreu, in as much as Tony, Esther, and I love very much bridge, he likes it in a different manner. He loves to become the dummy. That means the guy that doesn't play in one hand. Now, it has nothing to do with the serious dummy word. He is not really a dummy when he's impersonated as a dummy. I think that what he's really doing in the background is the more serious and dignified games. So I just wanted to bring this because I think that he has always loved games, but the dignified ones. Okay.
Yeah. So I want to thank the Universitat Pompeu Fabra for hosting us, and Jaume Casals, el rector.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. As you can suppose, I am not going to comment on the book. I will try to keep in my place. And what I think that perhaps I can say is something, a few words on time. Some words that reminds me very much of Josep Calsamilla, now that I am seeing here in the first line, Xavier Calsamilla. Josep Calsamilla, who was my professor in la Universitat Autònoma. By the way, I have enjoyed very much this masterpiece that you have put in this book at the end as a postface with a sort of intellectual short biography of Andreu. It seems to me very, very delicate and really a lesson of how to write about a friend and an interesting person in the intellectual sense. With Joachim, he knows that because I tell him that I have told the same in Harvard and the same to Antoni Bosch. Well, what I would like to say that we are moderns. One of the characteristics of modernity is to have an idea of time, to assume an idea of time as a line. The time is something that we think as escaping at every moment. This is probably because we have a sort of linguistic background. Then we thought on abstract concepts in the same way that we think on language. Language is, when we think language is something that has this structure of line. Every word, every part of word, when we are speaking, has to pass by the hole of a needle. And this is the succession of moments, as Aristotle defined the time. And this is in some way our condition. But when we feel in a most privacy moment, I mean not only in self-privacy, but when we met some friends, when we are in a family context, when we think the life from a group, like the ancient Greeks call the philoi, the beloved, we have, perhaps even now in the modern moment, we have some other ideas of time. The ancient Greeks called this kind of time with several words. One of these words is aion. In the Roman pantheon, there are a divinity called occasion. Those are some perspectives on time, qualitative, that don't are thinking in the time as a line, as something that corresponds to the leitmotif tempus fugit. And one of the words that contains something of this kind of time and that tries to translate aion is, this is not very good, I don't know the word exactly in English. Perhaps in English we have to say age, but we say in Catalan and Spanish and other languages, época. Época means that we are suspending the time in some way. We are thinking the time in suspending it, or in suspending this line that is escaping all time, as our words, our speaking is all times escaping us. When we think in this privacy moment, then we can find another relation with time. And I am sure that most of you, perhaps all of you, because you are here, you will agree with me if when we will meet in the future, some of us, we will speak of all these years that we have spent in the university context as the time of Andreu Mas-Colell. We cannot go very, very far from this idea, because it's an idea that belongs to the heart and belongs to the practice of every day. Then this is my way to say thank you very much to Andreu Mas. Thank you very much indeed.